Hi everyone and welcome to VLGA Connect in the weekly newsroom segment with the CEO of the VLGA, Kathryn Arndt. Hello Kathryn.
Hi Chris, it's Friday again.
Have you recovered from the 100 episode celebrations that we had last week? I'm sure you
Well,
partied into
the
the night in
party has been
lockdown.
going all week. I just can't tell you. I'm pleased it's Friday and we can move on now from the 100 celebration.
We were just discussing before we started recording, when you look back on, what is it, 6 months, 7 months of doing these things, we actually do look a little bit different after 6 months in lockdown, don't we?
We do, and I must say perhaps a little more sophisticated than we started out, but all credit to us, I think, for getting the program off the ground so quickly and then tweaking it as we've gone, and now we are up to 100 and something episodes and looking very professional, I would say, compared to I can speak for myself, looking like a deer in the headlight on episode 1. And also I had a San Francisco virtual background. So I'm pleased that we've managed to move on from that.
We did get a bit of mail about that at the time, didn't we?
We did, absolutely, yes.
One of those default Zoom backgrounds. So I'm in my new VLGA Connect studio this week because I've finally got a green screen so that backgrounds work properly, Kathryn.
And it looks fantastic, Chris, excellent.
Thank you. Well, on to the business of the week. And we had the Caretaker Convention Live panel earlier in the week with a very good attendance. This was a joint collaboration between the VLGA and LG Pro. And despite a few technical hiccups, which goes with the territory, it was a pretty good session.
It was, and can I just say, I was very pleased that the VLGA was able to collaborate with LG Pro, Chris, and you wearing your other hat, which is, of course, interim CEO of LG Pro, and I really look forward to many more such collaborations. The technical hiccup was a little tricky for a moment there, but I thought we managed our way through that, and certainly the audience participation and the questions coming through kept us going. It's always hard when you have a panel of 2 and you lose the only lawyer on the panel due to a technical issue, but I'm very pleased that Tony made his way back at the end and was able to sum up a few of those key legal questions that the audience had.
And full marks to Stephen Cooper from the VLGA for assisting while Tony was absent with his very deep governance knowledge.
Yeah.
And what I particularly enjoyed, Kathryn, was the opportunity to hear from Jenny Menzies about the origins of caretaker, those principles that have underpinned why we have this regime in the first place, which do bear repeating and reflecting on.
They absolutely do, Chris, and I think if candidates and even staff in the sector just really focus or reflect back on those principles and adhere to those, then we won't need to search continuously for definitive answers necessarily on all of the things that someone can and cannot do during the caretaker provisions. And Jenny also offered some reflections on caretaker conventions or periods at other levels of government, and of course at state and federal levels, cabinets don't meet during the caretaker period, whereas of course in local government some councils do choose to continue to meet, and we had a really interesting discussion about why that might be, and should it in fact be the case when a council has had a term of 4 years. The date of the caretaker, or the beginning of that caretaker period, was known well in advance, and therefore, how can councillors and councils transact their business over those 4 years in order to then perhaps not have to meet during the caretaker period?
Yes, I think it does bear some reflection, as we did see there are some different approaches to that issue. And one thing that sort of occurred to me throughout that is the regime now is very principles based, which is the intention of the new legislation, and there is some autonomy amongst councils to determine how they go about their business in keeping those principles in mind. There's an example of how you can take a perfectly valid but different approach to an issue.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And we heard an excellent example from Southern Grampians, for example, who talked about, why they continue to meet. And it was entirely sensible and appropriate for their council and community, whereas other councils have different policies. And I think you're right in terms of the principle space. It's where the sector will take a little time, I imagine, to start to work through, what is principles versus what is prescription. And, I think we talked about at the panel the other day to err on the side of caution if it doesn't quite pass the sniff test, or as I think I said, if you can find 2 reasons not to do it, then perhaps it's a good reason not to do that during a caretaker period.
And that principle sort of applies to some of the things that candidates might be thinking of doing during this this current election campaign. So let's focus on that for a moment. Nominations are now open. They opened on the 17th and they're open until the 22nd, which is when the election period actually starts. I've been cherry picking a few councils on the VEC website to see some of those nominations starting to come through, and there's quite a few people already putting their hand up.
Yes, there are. I did note that last night also. So, of course, there is lots of questions coming from candidates via social media about what they can and cannot do. And again, the advice from the VLGA is to really understand the perception that an activity or an action might in fact create. And we're looking at the elections as being, of course, a fair process, which means that both incumbents or councillors who are re-standing and also candidates from the community who aren't currently councillors do need to have a relatively equal playing field in order for that election to be a fair process. So lots of questions around, can I use, from councillors, can I use, council related material to promote my campaign or not? Now, of course, you really do need to go back to your own council's election policies in regard to those things, but there's also guidelines from Local Government Victoria, the Inspectorate and the VEC.
There are indeed. So that bears thinking about, and I'm sure there'll be more questions as the next few weeks play out. The governance and integrity regulations have pretty much finished their consultation period for the government. So these are important in terms of the induction process for new councils post the election. I know the VLGA has been putting a lot of thought into how it can assist with the induction of new councils.
Absolutely. So we're just waiting, of course, the mandatory induction content hasn't been finalised or released as yet, but the VLGA will be offering induction training for councils or councillors, and of course that will go beyond the minimum required mandatory training, similar to the candidate information sessions that we ran and had such a great uptake of. I think we, in the end, had over 1,000 participants in those sessions across probably 5 months or 6 months. So we expect and already are seeing a lot of interest from councils for us to run training that will be module based. So councils will be able to cherry pick what induction modules are particularly relevant for their council. So all CEOs should have received a letter from me yesterday, and please reach out if you want some more information on that.
Terrific. And I'm sure there'll be opportunities to talk a lot more about the induction process in the months ahead.
It's
Kathryn.
Such an important process for, even for councils that have been re-elected, just to refresh, get their understanding up to date. We've got a new act, we've got new legislation, lots to get our heads around.
Absolutely. All right, we'll leave it there. Great to talk as always. Lots happening around local government. I'm really looking forward to the next few weeks as we get to the pointy end of the election cycle. Kathryn, have a great week.
You too, Chris. See you next week.
Kathryn Arndt, the CEO of the VLGA, with our weekly newsroom segment here on VLGA Connect.